This song's been playing in my head the last few weeks, especially the second verse. There's roads and there's roads, they call, can't you hear it? Roads of the earth and roads of the Spirit. The best roads of all are the ones that aren't certain. One of those is where you'll find me till they drop the big curtain. Now, I've never thought of myself as a child of the wind. I've always reserved that image for other people, sorts of people that don't wear shoes, sorts of people that take off at a moment's notice to hitchhike to California because the universe told them to, you know. I heard the voice of the universe, man, and it was Bette Midler. And she said, fly, the wind will be beneath your wings. And so I just left, man. I soared. That's just not me. That's not me. But if we are in the church, we are children of the wind. We are children, people of the Spirit. We may be more comfortable with Garrison Keillor's description of us as the frozen chosen. We may be more comfortable with our feet planted firmly on the ground. But we are children of the wind, which means that the Spirit will be moving in our midst and seeking to lift our feet off the ground a bit and to blow us around some. We are to be people who are blown around by the Spirit. Now, as we think about the story that Bill read for us and think about the disciples, I think we often think of those disciples, those first disciples, as different than us. I often think of them as different than us because they knew Jesus. They hung out with Jesus all the time. They knew his favorite foods. They knew all of his favorite things. They saw the miracles. They saw the crowds. They saw the healings. They benefited from his personal teachings. And one would think that if you experienced that, you would have a deep faith. If only we had experienced that, now certainly we would have a deep, unshakable faith. But the Gospels tell us a different story about who the disciples were. According to the stories of the Gospels, the disciples, first disciples, were pretty dense. They were always misunderstanding what Jesus was saying. They were always frustrating Jesus with their failures, with their incompetence. They disobeyed. They pursued their own selfishness. They betrayed Jesus when it mattered most. He died because of them. They fled in fear because when he just needed a friend, Jesus had to be saying to God, really? This is the best you can do? This is the cream of the crop? These bozos? Really? Well, after the resurrection, Jesus is with the disciples for roughly 50 days. And they ask him, they say, so when are you going to restore the kingdom to Israel? When are you going to fix all this? When's the new age going to come? We're ready. When are you going to do it? And Jesus says to them, the Holy Spirit will give you power when it is poured out on you. You will be a part of the redeeming of the world. You are going to take my mission on from here. But you won't be alone. And then Jesus ascends into heaven. The disciples are there waiting, wondering what this means, wondering what to do next. And then the Holy Spirit comes upon them, as we heard in our story for today. And what happens is, thanks to the power of the Spirit, they become the church, these misfits. And they come out of their house unafraid, and they start to proclaim to others about Jesus and how Jesus is saving the world, how Jesus has saved them, how Jesus could save you too. And they create a new community of love that cares for the vulnerable, that welcomes in strangers, that reconciles with enemies. And they find their backbone. These people who have fled in fear at the foot of the cross, they find their backbone. And they start to proclaim the good news of Jesus, and they stand for all that Jesus stood for, even when the authorities are breathing down their neck, threatening them with jail and death. Even then, they keep talking about Jesus. It's as if God is saying to us, now if I can work miracles with these guys, certainly I can work miracles with you too. The Spirit will be there. I'll be with you. Let's go. For the Spirit to work miracles with us, we must be children of the wind, a community that's open to the Spirit. This means we must be open and allowing the Spirit to change our focus and to move us. And change, of course, isn't easy. I hear the Spirit calling me to change too, and I'm not all that comfortable with it. I was just at a conference meeting and going to workshops on social networking and things like that, which is just not something that I've really cared much about, but I know I need to, and I need to start grappling with it and using it. The Spirit calls us to be open to change, to do new things. And one way that we open ourselves to the Spirit is through dreaming. As Peter starts preaching at the end of that story, he quotes the prophet Joel, who says, "In those last days, the Spirit, I will pour out my Spirit upon you," God says. "And the young will see visions, and the old will dream dreams." And one question that comes out of this is, what are our dreams for our church? What are our dreams for our church's ministry in this place? What are our dreams for our lives of faith? Which is really to say our lives. We can't separate our life of faith from our lives. What are our dreams for our lives? And I invite you to think about these questions this week. But there's another question that's different that comes from this too. And that question is, or those questions are, what are the Spirit's dreams for this church? What are the Spirit's dreams for our ministry in this place? What are the Spirit's dreams for our lives? They may well be different. But God invites us to trust that God's dreams for us are better than any dreams that we can come up with on our own. God invites us to make some space for the Spirit to start dreaming in us, for another to start dreaming in us, and for the Spirit to start leading us. I want to tell the story of two nuns who opened themselves to the movement and the dreaming of the Spirit, and to speak a little bit about what's been happening since then. A few weeks ago, I was on study leave, and I went to spend a few days at Holy Wisdom Monastery in Madison on retreat, and I had a great time there. But I'd been there a year before when I was on sabbatical last summer. I visited the community for Sunday worship, for Sunday assembly. I heard good things about the community, so I wanted to check it out. And they had just built a building that was a new monastery that was the most environmentally responsible building in the United States. And I wanted to tour this building and see what it was like. So I came to worship that day, and there were 200, 300 people in the room. It was a full house. It was a vibrant community that was gathered there, and I sat down by myself, kind of in a corner, and was minding my own business. The Benedictines are known for their hospitality, so after a little while, before worship starts, this woman who's in her late 70s, at least early 80s, with white curly hair, walks up to me very slowly with a smile on her face and offers her hand for me to shake it. She says, "I'm Sister Joanne. Welcome to Holy Wisdom Monastery." And so we talk a little bit, and I share why I'm there, and she says, I didn't recognize your face, so I thought you must be new here. And she started telling me about what would be happening in worship and the directions I needed to know for communion, and offered me a warm welcome, and I said, "I hope this is a Spirit-filled time for you here this morning. We're glad you're here." And then she turned and she walked slowly off to find another new face and to offer the same sort of welcome. Well, after worship, I went on the tour of the building, and was very impressed with the building and all the thought that had gone into this structure. But I was even more impressed with the community and their story. Holy Wisdom Monastery was founded in 1958 in Madison, and it was a very typical Benedictine monastery. It had a community of nuns, and it had an academy that started shortly after. But over time, that community had been fading away. The academy closed, and by the 90s, there were only 2 nuns left. And at that time, they decided they'd continue going as they had and just close things down when they passed away, or they could open themselves to the Spirit and see what dreams the Spirit might be dreaming in them. And so that's what they did. And after a while, they discerned the Spirit calling them to travel on two particular roads of ministry. A dream emerged in them for them to become an ecumenical women's community, a more than Catholic monastery. They wanted to invite Catholics and Protestants in. Anyone who wanted to experience the gifts of Benedictine spirituality, they wanted to invite them in. Now, this is radical new territory. But the Spirit was leading them on this path, and so they kept going. It led them eventually to a confrontation with the Bishop of Madison, and ultimately to their leaving the Catholic Church in order to continue pursuing this path of ministry, but they left. That's what they did. No one can accuse these two nuns of lacking courage. And so now there are 3 sisters that live there. They've invited one Protestant sister who lives in intentional community with them at the monastery, but there are also 300 members of their Sunday assembly, which is essentially their church, 300 people who gather there on a regular basis for worship. There are at least 40 in the oblate program, which is one level of commitment to the Benedictine way of life. There are at least 30 in the community of St. Benedict, which is men and women. That's another level of commitment to the Benedictine way of life. The Sunday worship that I was a part of was clearly a gathering of deeply faithful people who were finding refuge in that place because they had been wounded by the church and its failures in one way or another. It was providing very important ministry. The Spirit also called them to continue and deepen their care for the earth. They care for 138 acres of land. On their land is a 10,000-year-old glacier lake, Lost Lake, and it was 9 acres in surface area, but it had shrunk to 2 because of runoff from farmland and runoff from residential development, and it wasn't doing its job anymore. It wasn't collecting any of the rainwater that was draining into it. All that was just running off and going on into Lake Mendota. So they dredged out the lake, and they expanded it to its original 9 acres, and now it's once again doing its job, which is draining the water that's coming from the surrounding farmland and residential area, keeping it from going into Lake Mendota. They have also been restoring 100 acres of prairie on that property, and that's a continued process. And they had a dream of building a new monastery to meet the new needs for the new people that are part of their community, but they wanted to do not just any building, but a building that was in line with their value of caring for God's creation. And so they built a building that had the highest LEED certification of any building in the United States, the most environmentally responsible building built yet in our country. This monastery was in danger of closing a few times, but these 2 sisters were open to the movement of the Spirit. The Spirit dreamed dreams in them and led them along roads of ministry that they didn't imagine traveling before. There are now nearly 500 other people who are experiencing Benedictine spirituality in one form or another. Hundreds more like me who are finding refuge there for a few days at a time on retreat, benefiting from good food, quiet, deep and heartfelt prayer and worship. And thanks to the Spirit's leading, they become environmental leaders in the region and the country. These 2 nuns, they've earned 21 awards locally and nationally for their environmental efforts. Now, who would have thought that these 2 aging nuns could have a ministry like this? But they're not acting on their own. They're children of the wind. They're open to the Spirit. So what are our dreams for our church, for our lives? What are the Spirit's dreams for us? So many churches in the United Church of Christ are in a similar place that Holy Wisdom Monastery was back in the 90s. We can continue going as we bend and fade away, or we can open ourselves to the Spirit, practice this discipline of opening ourselves to the Spirit, and allow the Spirit to lift our feet off the ground a bit. Allow the Spirit to blow us about and call us down roads that we may not have thought were possible. Call us down roads where we can't exactly see the end point. We don't know exactly where all we might be going. To trust that God's dreams for us are better than anything we can dream up on our own. And to realize that this is the Christian journey, being blown about a bit as we follow Jesus, and it's a good road. There's roads and there's roads. They call, can't you hear it? Roads of the earth and roads of the Spirit. The best roads of all are the ones that aren't certain. One of those is where you'll find me till they drop the big curtain. Hear the wind moan in the bright diamond sky. These mountains are waiting, brown, green, and dry. I'm too old for the term, but I'll use it anyway. I'll be a child of the wind till the end of my days. May it be so. Amen.